Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gostola, managing editor for Shadowproof.com, and welcome to this week's Dissenter weekly update. For this is February 11th, 2021. Before we get rolling on our whistleblower stories for the week, Brian has a few things for you.
Hi, Kevin. Good to be back with you and all of you out there watching. Just a reminder, especially if you're joining us for the first time, to make sure that you're following Shadowproof wherever you're watching right now so you can keep up to date, not only on these streams, but on the reporting that we publish at shadowproof.com. And if you like it and you want to support it and you want to chip in, we have a lot of different options at shadowproof.com/donate. Including our wonderful newsletter that Kevin writes at dissenter.substack.com, which we'll give up a link to at the end here. But that's really it. Let's dive right into our stories for this week then, Kevin. The first one we have here, whistleblower at Amazon Fulfillment Center under construction reveals hazards that could cause lung damage. Why don't you walk us through this story?
This one's reported by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, a local news in Texas, covering conditions at a Amazon fulfillment center. And what's unique to me about this story, especially in this current climate, is that it actually has nothing to do with COVID-19. For the most part, the stories that we've been reading of safety hazards at Amazon facilities have involved their inability or neglect when it came to instituting COVID-19 safety measures, with workers complaining about those conditions. But this has to do with construction in general and what contractors are dealing with at a building. The whistleblower had safety responsibilities at the Amazon Fulfillment Center, that is at a center that's under construction in Fort Worth. He says that the hazards are putting workers' safety at risk. Jose Rodriguez of Houston showed photographs and video that were taken inside this 1 million square foot building. The images show people working without N95 respirators in a dusty, dimly lit area where contractors are drilling into concrete to install metal racks. The fine dust from concrete, masonry, and rock can cause lung damage and even death, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So that's a quote from the report by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And it continues to say that photos also show workers on ladders and scaffolds placed on a corrugated metal deck. Rodriguez, who is a former safety manager, says he reported the safety concerns and he showed the photos to OSHA, which is in the labor department and would handle issues with workplace conditions. And he shared it there, and then he was fired a few hours later. This was on January 29th. He says a language barrier makes it difficult for safety managers who speak only English to correct any imminent danger because many of the workers speak only Spanish. And there's an electrician who was spoken to for this article who corroborated some of these complaints, and was shown the photograph. And he said that he fears the lives. They said that they fear for the lives of former colleagues who could still be at risk. And so the article provides some important context too about the nature of Texas as a state for workers. It's one of the deadliest in the U.S. Because of their reliance on subcontractors that make it very difficult to train employees and track the safety history of companies. And so this is this is another example of the kind of thing that whistleblowers are going through when it comes to Amazon. Like I said, we've had multiple stories with Amazon whistleblowers over the last year to 2 years, especially with COVID-19. But this one just seems like, pandemic or no pandemic, Amazon would be neglecting these contractors.
Oops, sorry about that, Kevin. Accidentally just removed you from the stream there. Thank you for that. Let's move on to our next story here. We have Neera Tanden, who a lot of people have been having fun with this week, who was in her hearing in Congress. She clumsily acted like she knows the issues surrounding nuclear waste. I know we have a clip here, Kevin. I have not seen this yet, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
So before you play it, let me just set this up. I had to find some way to work Neera Tanden into this simply because we know that she said about us, Brian, that we aren't really an actual news outlet, which was one of my more memorable moments with Neera. A lot of us on the left have memorable moments interacting with Neera because she would engage with us, and I think that's why, to an extent, why Matt Brunig deemed her scumbag Neera, if we remember what happened in that, and we followed what happened to him and how he faced a backlash for going after her. So, anyways, I wanted to find a way to work a moment from this hearing, which actually somehow oddly, this position is so all encompassing that she got two hearings from two different committees, which are basically like it's one confirmation hearing of day one and day two, but it's handled by two separate House committees. So the one that we're watching here was the one that got more attention because it was chaired by Bernie Sanders, a budget committee. I realize a lot of people on the left are focusing on the fact that Bernie Sanders has been relentlessly attacked by Neera Tanden in the last 5 years because she's such a supporter of Hillary Clinton, and that people can't believe that he is in this position where he's likely to approve and allow her confirmation, her nomination to be moved to the next level for a wide vote in the Senate. I think people just think like, you've been so disrespected. How could you allow this person to get through a committee you now control? That issue aside, there are grassroots people that are demanding that people reject Neera Tanden. I wanted to work this in here, which I happened to catch. This was one of the few moments I actually watched live, and I didn't really expect her to bill herself as someone who was familiar with the handling of nuclear waste. But she, in fact, says in this clip that she does know. What does that have to do with this show where we talk about whistleblowers and cover stories that are related every single week? The Hanford nuclear site is viewed as a kind of growth for whistleblowing in America, and that's what Tom Mueller, who's the author of Crisis of Conscience, has said. He wrote this really fantastic book about whistleblowers in the United States. And that's where I learned a lot about the perils of blowing the whistle against these nuclear waste treatment plants or these contractors that are involved in doing massive cleanup operations. There's a ton of fraud and safety problems with the site in Washington where they once produced plutonium for U.S. nuclear weapons. And so there's that. Of course, people have heard of Yucca, but then there's other places throughout the country in which there's nuclear waste that is housed, and there's a lot of hazardous conditions that come with this. And so then there's that of course ties into the issue of nuclear energy and whether this country is going to have that be a part of the energy future of the United States. It comes with tremendous risks. And we all are familiar with the 3 Mile Island incident. And so let's play this clip, Brian. And I think that sufficiently sets up that's all the background information you need. We can just watch this. This person here in this clip is Senator John Kennedy, and I believe he's from Louisiana. He's talking about this issue of nuclear waste. And I'll just say this before you watch this. I don't immediately think of Neera Tanden as an expert on nuclear waste, and I don't expect her to hold herself out as somebody who understands these issues. However, she does do that in this hearing. And so if you're going to do that when you're up for a job spot, if you're going to act like you know about this, then you should actually know about this as you are giving your answers. So go ahead, play the clip.
All right, here we go.
Powerful the OMB position is that you will touch on just about every social and economic policy. You're probably also aware that we produce, we meaning the United States, produce about 200,000, or rather 2,000 metric tons of nuclear waste every year. And we've got it stored all over hell in half of Georgia. I think about 80 different locations. It's dangerous. I'd like your personal thoughts, not the president's thoughts, but your personal thoughts about what we ought to do about that.
I've studied various issues like Yucca Mountain and other issues around nuclear waste. And I think the challenge around nuclear power, personally, my perspective is that nuclear power is cleaner. And when we are thinking about greenhouse gas emissions,
Yes,
that's an
ma'am, and
option.
excuse me for interrupting. I
I'm
hate
sorry.
to do this, but what do you think we ought, if anything, we ought to do about the nuclear waste being dispersed around the United States?
I think it is, I think we should be taking active steps to ensure the security of
Anything
nuclear
else?
waste.
We want it to be secure. We can agree on that. Anything else?
Sir, I'm happy to work with you in your office on concerns you have about nuclear waste
All right,
disposal.
let me ask you this. Is it not true that you have
Well, go ahead.
told
You can play this.
a major news organization of this country that you support moving that waste to Yucca Mountain?
I don't believe I have, actually. But
Okay.
I'm happy to examine some statement I've made in the past.
Well, you're under oath. Are you saying you didn't say it or you don't remember it?
I have to tell you, I don't remember making any comments about Yucca Mountain, but in my long career, I may have. So I'm happy to I don't know. I'm not remembering as this
Okay.
moment.
All right, let me ask
You
you
can stop it there.
about,
Although this does have the great moment after here where he says that you called Bernie just about every other name in the book
Oh,
except
right.
ignorant slut, which is a great moment in confirmation hearing history. But
That was an awkward clip.
but so to the clip, like, she very clearly does not have any idea about this issue. And I'll say frankly that it's news to me as somebody who is a citizen of this country that the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, is actually involved in the managing of our nuclear waste and determines, I guess, some of the resourcing and how the government would handle that. So I didn't know that was some kind of a job responsibility that you might take on if you're at OMB. I normally think of it in terms of financial issues. That's why it's been much more important to talk about how she was in favor of this kind of third way balancing of the budget, deficit hawkery with cuts to Social Security in the past, that she had entertained that. But the clip's just really astounding to me that she begins to try and talk about this issue and yet clearly knows absolutely nothing about it, even though she claims she studied Yucca Mountain and other issues, but she can't even speak in complete sentences about it. And she says what aren't even talking points, because I think even talking points are more sophisticated than what she's saying. And she's like, we need security. And then he moves that aside because it's not a specific answer to the question. And then she's got nothing. And she's like, well, I'll be happy to meet with you in your office, which is the standout out for any person who's going through a confirmation hearing and doesn't say. And so with that, I get to have my hit on the near pipe and then move on to the next.
You got your swipes in. That is a bizarre exchange there, but I'm glad that you raised it. I don't know why she just said, like, I don't really know, and we can talk about it like you said, but let's move on to our next story here. What would a Biden agenda that promoted press freedom and freedom of expression look like? That's a very good question, and I would like to hear your thoughts on it, Kev.
Yeah, and this may seem like Fantasyland kind of a conversation, but we were a little lower on stories as far as whistleblowing might is that the impeachment trial has disrupted the standard flow of some of these stories that we get on a weekly basis, which then I managed to stumble across this previous posting by the Knight First Amendment Institute, where Jamil Jaffer is, and he's very outspoken against the prosecution, and he also submitted testimony for Julian Assange's extradition trial. And I think this institute, which is at the Columbia University, has pretty good credibility when it comes to these First Amendment issues, and put together this list, a collection of things that Biden could do in his first 100 days if he wanted to prove that his administration was willing to stand up for the First Amendment or attacks on the First Amendment that were committed by Donald Trump or that previous administrations had let unaddressed. We've had erosion of our First Amendment in the last decades. So what could be done to improve everything in this country? And so the list that they settled upon, I'll read what these items are, these ideas are, and then maybe I'll focus on a couple of these just to say a few words about why those would be significant. So one was to narrow or withdraw policies that unconstitutionally restrict public servants from participating in policy debates, routinely publish White House visitor logs, impose new limits on the surveillance of journalists, rescind President Trump's executive order directed at social media platforms, publish the Office of Legal Counsels, that's in the Justice Department, publish their final legal opinions, require a warrant for searches of electronic devices at U.S. borders, rescind social media registration requirements for travel and immigration applicants, disclaim the use of the Espionage Act for the prosecution of journalists, sources, and publishers. That's one that we talk about almost every week on this show. Reform the pre-publication review system, and rescind President Trump's executive order on the International Criminal Court. That one's highly specific. To start with that one, that last one there, that relates to this order that was issued that basically sanctioned anyone who was involved in the work of the International Criminal Court and their investigation to go after, to dig into war crimes that have been committed in the Afghanistan war by all parties involved. And Trump, with the support of Secretary of State Pompeo, issued this. And there was a court that overturned it, I believe, as a threat against the First Amendment. But the executive order is still in place as a kind of attack on this body, this international body that the U.S. has, for the most part, always resented because they don't want any kind of international legal body telling them what they can and can't do. And we think that we should be able to make those choices ourselves, and we should be able to police ourselves, which usually means holding nobody accountable for anything that is done. Reforming the pre-publication review system relates to books. It relates to particularly former national security or military employees who want to write books. They have to submit those books, and they go through very tight process of pre-publication review. But we've done stories in the past on this show, and I know that John Kiriakou has gone through this, CIA whistleblower, and there's evidence of just as much of a double standard in the pre-publication review system as there is when it comes to who gets charged under the Espionage Act. So there are people who submit their books, and they have a lot of stuff that they can't keep in there, and it's really difficult to get their book past the censors. And then and it's hard to get them to actually go through your book, which they're required to do. And sometimes they might ignore you, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And then there are people who are, let's say, like maybe John Brennan or Leon Panetta, who can write books, and then they get to leave in a whole bunch of sensitive material in their books just because of who they are. And so there's been a lot of attention on what could be done to address the pre-publication review system. There's been cases that have been filed alleging that it does undermine the First Amendment as far as the restrictions on speech for former employees. There's an ongoing dispute over an unsympathetic figure, John Bolton's book, and a lot of times review standards, as the Knight First Amendment Institute points out, can be very vague and overbroad. There are long delays, as I was mentioning. And like I said, a lot of these decisions that are made about what to take out and what's allowed to be kept in are arbitrary, unexplained, or politically driven. There's really no accountability. The political censorship that goes on is just basically, to some degree, actually, those of you who have followed the demonetization of people by YouTube would recognize that there's a similarity where there's not a lot of explanations. It just happened. They tell you can't keep this in, and you have to let them make those decisions because you have no authority. And if you want your book published, you have to allow them to remove whatever from your book. Same goes with YouTube. If you want to have your channel, you've got to listen to them about what's controversial. And if you want to bring in money for what you are covering, then you have to listen to them. So it's kind of similar. Then a couple other good ones. I mean, it does point out that the social media registration requirement, the Biden administration on January 20th did order a review of social media surveillance during this vetting and screening of visa applicants. This is something that obviously Donald Trump's administration leaned into, given their opposition to immigration in general. And the issues over warrants for searches of electronic devices, that's been a huge issue with civil liberties groups and press freedom organizations fighting to end this for at least the last decade. I mean, almost as long as I've been doing journalism, I remember this being something that has been a big part of the conversation. And then imposing new limits on surveillance of journalists, of course, has been an outstanding issue over the last decade. As we've seen the increase of these leak prosecutions, that has come with greater surveillance of journalists who are talking to sources that may be responsible for leaks. And so that has meant that there's greater surveillance, and that's certainly been a problem. And last week, we did talk about this restricting public servants from participating in policy debates that happened to scientists in the Trump administration. It can happen to all federal agencies, and it's not really a partisan thing. Both the Obama or Trump administrations, the Bush administrations, you could probably go back and find examples of them not liking when somebody spoke out from their position in a professional capacity, saying something that dissented from the administration's line. And so, yeah, there has been a push to get some protections for that speech, because those people aren't necessarily whistleblowers. They're just people who should have the ability to engage in freedom of speech without repercussions.
Thank you, Kevin. That's a great report. If I were to add aspirationally to that list, it would be to give, at least in the federal system, if not put pressure on the states as the president, but to open up media transparency in prisons, drop a lot of the bullshit regulations, centralize media policies over wardens' heads. I think for me, whenever I hear people want to talk about press freedom and freedom of expression, as you know, as you and I talk about a lot privately, I think prisons are honestly the lowest hanging fruit in terms of the most glaring press and free speech violations, and the ones that probably deserve to be attacked in the forefront.
It's a good addition.
Yeah. Let's go on to our next story here. The Chief Inspector of Prisons in the United Kingdom releases a review of pandemic prison restrictions. What is this story?
So it may be obvious to people watching, but this one makes the show simply because Julian Assange is in the Belmarsh prison, and we've been following his case closely as he remains in detention, denied bail, unable to be out. And so he has faced these pandemic restrictions, which were investigated, which were given some kind of study. It was the subject of a study that was done by this chief inspector of prisons. And at the end of this report, I'll just read what this HM chief inspector of prisons, Charlie Taylor, has to say in concluding that the cumulative effect of such prolonged and severe restrictions on prisoners' mental health and well-being is profound. The lack of support to reduce reoffending and help prisoners address their risk of serious harm to the public does not fill me with hope for the longer term. And it goes on and on. Locking prisoners up in prolonged isolation has never been a feature of a healthy prison. I mean, healthy prison kind of seems like an oxymoron to us, right, Brian? But that being said, the point is important since we've had a lot of focus on the deterioration of Julian Assange's mental health. We've paid some consideration to the thousands upon thousands of prisoners around the world who remained in facilities throughout the global pandemic. And yet we haven't seen the level of decarceration, I think, that should have taken place in order to protect them. I mean, even if you thought they still needed to be in those facilities, you could go round them up again later after the pandemic when it was possibly safe for them to return to the facilities. I recall, I don't know if it was the only country that did this, but I recall that this was the route that Iran was going to take with tens of thousands of people in their own country. Seems like this would have been a nice way to handle everything. It's always been very atrocious to me that Julian Assange has remained in this facility during a pandemic when it is clear that there are a lot of risks to his safety. I'm sure that can apply to a lot of people. He hasn't been convicted of a crime, which is another thing that makes what he's going through unsettling. And so that's a part of the report that I want to give particular attention. So there's a section that looks at people like him who were just detained. They're waiting on their hearings. And it points out that because of the delay of court hearings and trials, by the end of September 2020, the number of unconvicted prisoners in the United Kingdom was the highest it had been since 2014. Some were frustrated by extended waits for court appearances. We spoke to children who were in custody for the first time and were expecting to spend almost a year waiting for their trial. This is a daunting prospect and felt very unfair to them. The uncertainty they described contrasted starkly with prisoners serving determinate sentences who repeatedly told us how a release date gave them something positive to work toward. One child explained, "I'm going to be on remand for a year. The delay in my case has been the worst effect of coronavirus." To address the delays in court hearings and support infection control, prisoners often appeared from prison by video link. These appearances and by the way, Assange has done this, has used the video link. These appearances can be stressful. We're sometimes marred by technical issues and are sometimes canceled altogether. That has happened to Julian Assange. Prisoners sometimes struggle to stay in touch with and brief their solicitors. They had been unable to receive a visit from a legal representative for much of the pandemic and usually contacted them by phone. Trouble with accessing legal representation has also been a feature for Julian Assange's incarceration. This was often at their own expense and was much more challenging in prisons in cell phones, where the duration of calls was usually capped. Some prisoners ran out of time to discuss everything with their solicitor. Other prisoners had struggled to get their solicitor's phone number added to their list of authorized call recipients. Okay, so you get the idea that essentially this has been a huge problem for people who are trying to survive in prisons. What we're seeing described here in the United Kingdom is almost certainly happening in the U.S. system, almost certainly happening in almost all of the prison systems that have had to deal with this pandemic. And so I just provide this for some more color about what Julian Assange is going through. And his partner, Stella Morris, said that as of February 6th, quote, "Severe weather warnings have been issued in the United Kingdom over the next few days. Julian's warm winter clothes are still in prison storage." So on top of that, you have the fact that you still have to deal with administrators who aren't taking care of these people. The very, very cold winter and can't get your clothes that have been delivered to you in order to help you get through the season.
Horrible. But thank you for bringing that to our attention. And while we're on the subject of Assange, Kevin, why don't we give our update for this week as we normally do? On the Assange case, we have an interim DOJ spokesperson signals that the Biden administration will continue prosecution. Why don't you tell us about this and share some of your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So let me approach this from two sides. When I wrote up my piece at the Dissenter for my newsletter, I tackled this as it's a given that the Biden Justice Department is going to proceed with this case because an interim spokesperson named Mark Raimondi said we continue to seek his extradition and did this just days before February 12th. That's tomorrow. And this is the deadline for submitting what the U.S. views as its grounds for appeal. And as covered by Reuters, it essentially suggested what we know, which is that they're going to likely put together arguments that say why they do not believe Julian Assange would commit suicide if he was brought to the United States for trial and held in a detention facility, and then if convicted, put in a supermax prison or a high security prison or whatever kind of prison. They're going to cast doubt on this notion that his mental health is such that he would be able to carry out. Well, actually, I don't think it has anything to do with mental health. They're going to cast doubt on this idea that any of these facilities would allow Julian Assange to successfully take his own life, because that was what led to the U.S. ultimately losing their case on January 4th, or that was when it was announced. But that's why they didn't prevail in the extradition case. So that's one way of talking about this, is to say that hearing this spokesperson tell the media that they are going to file the grounds for appeal, it may mean that there's not going to be a change in the Biden Justice Department, but we still do not have an attorney general. The Justice Department is still to some degree in a transition period because, like I said, we don't have Merrick Garland has not been confirmed as Attorney General. We haven't even held that confirmation hearing yet for him, even though it is a really important post in the U.S. government. But we've had other figures go through their confirmation hearings, and somehow we're going to make sure Neera Tanden gets her spot in government before we confirm our Attorney General. So the Courage Foundation, which has been probably the foremost and leading group and is the support organization for Julian Assange, put together a different way of looking at this. And I think the statement has a lot of merit. So I want to read it because I did not include it in my write-up of this statement. But this is what the foundation had to say. The U.S. may submit its Assange appeal filing by Friday to meet its deadline, but one would expect a serious policy decision to be made by the new Attorney General, who, once confirmed, can review the incredibly weak case against Assange in full before making a determination. Reports are circulating that an interim spokesperson says the Biden administration will continue the Assange case. The incoming DOJ, whose Attorney General is yet to be confirmed, can drop the charges against Assange at any time, including after this Friday's appeal deadline. Trump's outgoing prosecutor, Zachary Terwilliger, suggested to NPR last month, which would have been January, that some government officials see the case as a waste of energy and resources, and that the Biden DOJ may not continue the prosecution. And then it continued to note a report or a analysis that was done by a Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press on Merrick Garland. They noted this and said that Biden's nominee, Merrick Garland, has taken strong positions in defense of the First Amendment as a federal judge. And they recommended that he consider ending the prosecution of Julian Assange. And so I think that there's some aspects of Merrick's background that are worth digging into. I haven't had a chance to do it myself, but I'm considering it for my newsletter. I'm not sure if I can do better than what the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press did. I will say there's not really a history or a record of Merrick Garland ever saying anything about Julian Assange or WikiLeaks. He hasn't had there's been no reason for him to weigh in because his job as a judge, there weren't any cases that had to deal with that. He has taken, as I understand, a pretty good stand in support of reporters' privilege before. In dissenting in cases, he has supported the reporters' privilege, which is just a huge deal for journalists. We just don't know what he thinks. And so part of this moment in the last few days, we saw a coalition of groups, civil liberties, press freedom organizations, human rights organizations, ones that are from the typical arenas of civil society, people who would be able to reach Joe Biden and get his attention. And they condemned this case and said that he absolutely needs to drop the charges against Assange. It was a direct message to the acting attorney general and the wider Justice Department that they should back off and abandon this case. So I'll say that right now it looks pretty certain that the appeal is pushing forward. But let me caveat that by saying nothing is etched in stone. They can always drop the charges. So I think that's something that we need to remember. While I believe that in my understanding of politics, that once you decide to put your ownership on this, it takes on a self-fulfilling prophecy where we will eventually see a loss at the highest level, they lose, or Julian Assange is brought to the United States and put on trial. I do think that there's this factor that exists in any situation, which is a group of people make enough noise and an unpopular decision and some kind of a, if they more cumbersome and hard to pursue, and if they just look at the cost benefit analysis and determine that it's not worth it to go forward with prosecuting Assange, then perhaps we'll be able to save someone from coming to the U.S., being put on trial, and we'll be able to avoid a precedent that would impose a restriction on journalism that would create a chilling effect, an even greater chilling effect than what already exists, because that would be obviously, as we've been talking about constantly for the last nearly 2 years now, that would be just dreadful. It'd be dreadful for that to be the case, that they had this trial and they won and got this decision. There's already been enough that has happened that has worked in the U.S. government's favor by getting the kind of extradition decision that they received from this judge, Vanessa Baretzer. It allowed them to make all of their arguments against press freedom and said that Julian Assange is probably guilty of the things that the U.S. government is accusing him of doing, but we think he's going to kill himself in a prison. So they already won. The U.S. government already won. I mean, they can drop this case and they've essentially won because they convinced a British court that it was reasonable for them to pursue a prosecution, a political prosecution against a journalist. So I think that's what people really need to focus on, is that there's an argument to be made that the Biden administration doesn't need to bring this case against Assange and actually put him on trial in order to win, because they already have won. They already have what they need, because in the future, if they need to make an example out of somebody who they see as the next iteration of Julian Assange, or the next kind of a Julian Assange figure, they'll be able to target that person because they've actually set up all the infrastructure as far as lawfare goes, and as far as being able to conduct an espionage operation against those people. They have all the tools that they need in order to defend the United States. And if it's about defending the United States, you don't actually have to get a conviction. A conviction is not the objective here. The goal is to protect U.S. interests without having anyone be able to challenge you meaningfully.
Thank you, Kevin. We'll certainly keep an eye on that as they confirm somebody to DOJ.
Yep.
And yeah, any final thoughts this week? You want to talk about your newsletter a little bit? Hype it
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. I've been following some of the comments that we've been getting in the chat. I really appreciate all of your engagement. And this is the newsletter. Many of you are already subscribers, and I thank you for making it successful. We've talked a bit about what we would like to do with it in the past, but the more people who subscribe, the more ability I have to expand it, to do more writings for it, and then to potentially even bring on somebody who could be an additional voice and give them a platform to do coverage of whistleblower stories and press freedom stories and things that relate to what we are focused upon with this. And again, because when you look at the mainstream media or the establishment media, you just simply don't see this as a news beat. People are not covering it well. There are local news outlets that will pick up these stories, and I tend to find them and share them. But nationally, as far as like progressive outlets go, this tends to be something that goes reasonably ignored. I'm not saying that that's a good choice, but it's a fair thing to say that they don't pick up on some of these stories. So I'm trying to fill this gap, and this Dissenter newsletter, as well as this show, has been filling this gap by making sure that our understanding of whistleblowing issues isn't solely partisan.
Mhm.
You know, every other time that the Democrats put forward someone to challenge a Republican administration and say that that's their whistleblower, well, there's a partisan angle to it, and that's why we're talking about that whistleblower. The Republicans are certainly going to find people while Joe Biden is president who they elevate as a whistleblower to be their opposition, the way that they fuel their opposition against Biden, to the way that they prove that Biden is corrupt. They're going to find their own whistleblower. They're going to claim, you know, I'm putting in quotes, conservatives are pretty bad when it comes to putting up people who are phonies and not really and truly whistleblowers. Which is not to say that there couldn't be a real person that blows the whistle against Joe Biden, just that I doubt the Republicans are going to support that person, because I don't see what nexus that person would have to their ideology and their own conservative or libertarian agenda. So that being said, if you sign up, you'll get access to the premium content, and you'll make it possible for us to continue expanding the journalism. And that's a pretty long-winded pitch, but there's a lot of different details with it. And I also think it's important to fill people in on what the future could be for the newsletter and how, you know, I think if we want to make the best use of the Substack platform, we start to consider how we might be able to take this very dedicated audience, these readers, this dedicated group of readers who care about these issues, and maybe hire another person who can continue to build on that interest in these specific issues. Because we don't have that. Like we could just do this at Shadowproof, but I also think that there's something really great about the direct engagement over email with people, and the way that I immediately can pull people in. And I get some really good comments. I want to thank you for those comments at the Dissenter newsletter. These are really, they're very good. And so I don't know, there's not really much more to add. I think for both of us, we're going to take next week off. You're going to be taking a break. You're going to be enjoying a vacation.
That's right.
You don't need to tell people where you're going, but just generally,
if anybody wants to come join me,
yes, yeah. During a pandemic, let's all encourage a group vacation.
I'll tell you, I'll be in Maine. You can come find me.
Well, Matt Iglesias will find you.
No.
No, there. Just so you know that inside joke, there was a moment when Matt Iglesias was tweeting, and it turned out he happened to be in Maine, and
Mhm.
Brian was sorely afraid that he was going to run into him while he was traveling through Portland.
I was saying I was going to start carrying an egg in my pocket just in case I saw him, so I can bean him with it. Yeah.
But yeah, so
So-
you're gonna take a break, and I think that there's a lot that I've been experimenting with and trying in the first month and a half here in 2021, and with doing streams at the Shadowproof YouTube channel. So I think I'm gonna take a week off, and I don't know if that means there won't be a Dissenter Weekly. Certainly, if there's important stories to cover, I may still be here for that, but I'm not going to probably do any streaming next week. And I think I'm going to take a week off just to try and continue to develop this idea that I have for the kind of streaming show we can do with Shadowproof YouTube. I mean, there's a lot to navigate, right? There's a lot to, and then in the background, the nuisance in the background is whatever we produce, can it actually be monetized in a way that can support our journalism, or are they going to continue to be just, I mean, for lack of a better word, assholes about the work that we're trying to produce? Because, like, Ford Fisher is an amazing example of someone we talked about last week who got them to restore his channel, and so I guess you could say it was remonetized, and so now he doesn't face the issue he had, but he went and he re-uploaded footage, which I think he said they were playing at the impeachment trial in the Senate, or they were showing on NBC News, or NBC News has uploaded it to their YouTube. So he uploaded it, and it's his video. He shot it and he uploaded it, and then they tell him that, like, he can't put that on his channel or something like. It is absolutely absurd. And so, anyways, this is something that us independent and lefty media creators have to navigate and figure out what we're going to do. So, like, is it even worth it to put our energy here? Is there some other place we should be? Is there some other place more private we should be for streaming? Should we be saying, like, on a weekly basis, here's the time, join us. This is a webinar. See us do this video. This is what we're going to do. We're going to talk to you. Or I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But there's a lot that I want to go through and consider. I want to build out the kinds of guests that I can invite onto the show. So, again, to encourage audience participation, if you all out there have people you think we should be speaking to, let me know who you would like to have appear in a Shadowproof stream, or who you think I should be talking to about issues. It can be the whole range. It can be anything. It can be whatever you want. And just at the end there, I'll say Rockfin's a fine proposed idea. I'm experimenting with Rockfin as far as the unauthorized disclosure weekly podcast goes. The only problem with it, and I think even people who go there to try to subscribe, the only problem is it's using this model that I think we're going to see more platforms use in the future, but, like, it is entirely dependent on cryptocurrency, which is a nightmare. And so you get paid in cryptocurrency. You have to figure out how to go to an exchange and cash out, and you can get money. It's just a pain in the ass to try and figure out. And I think also for people who are trying to subscribe, they also have to be willing to get into it in that way. And I don't know that there are transactions that are just built around cash. And so that is the problem. That is the downside, and why I am not entirely certain that I want to put all my focus in. But what you gain if you do go to Rockfin, what you gain right now is that there is nobody there telling you are not going to bring in the value that you bring into the website. So every subscriber that you bring in on Rockfin, all the views you get, all the whatever traffic you bring to that platform, you get paid for that. That doesn't happen at YouTube. I mean, I'm certain that we are not being fairly valued at YouTube. I'm certain that we are getting like a 0.001% of what we probably should be getting, because I've seen how people can get much, much more just from being present on Rockfin. And so that tells me that YouTube isn't fairly valuing us. So we'll take the week off, both of us. You're going to be in the woods enjoying a getaway. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here revamping the streams, the YouTube channel, thinking about what we can do next, and taking in all of the advice and any comments you have. And I see just one more thing I want to get into, and then we'll wrap the show. I see Bo is saying we should do regular updates on Julian. That would be welcome, even if we have no updates. I mean, for the most part, if there's news, I'm putting together articles and sending them out with my newsletter. And also then on Thursdays, I'm doing this show and I'm updating on Julian Assange. If there's major breaking news, like he would be freed from prison, or they drop the case or something like that, or they file something, like we get to see the appeal filing from the U.S. government, I'll do a video around it. But I don't know, if there's no updates, it doesn't seem like there's much value in just doing a video. And I would say that that would be something for an activist to do. Being a journalist, I want to have some kind of content that I can share, something of substance to share. I'm not really in the game to just produce the same video day in and day out with these messages. That's more of something that perhaps the Courage Foundation would be doing. So if you want Julian Assange updates on a daily basis that just keep pushing his name out there, I'd encourage you to turn to the Courage Foundation for that kind of work. But there are other things. It's not always Julian Assange. There's other things related to U.S. national security and military and foreign policy that I dig into. And so if it's not whistleblowers, then I'll take my time to look at some of those arenas. And but that's a good idea. And I do think that there's a lot of stuff that we have on the YouTube channel that does keep that does keep people updated on Julian Assange's case. And does a lot better job than I'm not going to play the clip. I won't make you all watch it, but there was this clip that the Rising did for the Hill TV on Assange around the fact that Biden is likely to continue the case. It was absolutely awful, Brian. Like they brought these two pundits on. I mean, all I can think of is that like the Hill has these people in their system and they're required to book them, because I don't know why Crystal Ball or Sagar would want to talk to these people. They knew nothing about Julian Assange's case. One was a Democratic strategist named Roger Fisk, who was an aide for John Kerry. The other guy was named Keith, and he works for something like Silent Partners, like a consultancy firm for some conservative whatever. And they both, I don't remember his last name, so I'm kind of marginalizing him by just saying it's a guy named Keith. But they were both there, and Rogers saying, there has to be consequences. You just can't leak. Of course, the U.S. government's going to do something to Julian Assange. So that was Rogers' horrible view. And then Keith's, again, it's just a guy named Keith. His horrible view was that, so you just think anybody can appoint themselves a journalist and like anyone can just publish and like say they're a journalist? I was like, yeah, actually, you of all people should know that, because if you're into
on television,
because if you're into the Constitution, even remotely, you would know that our First Amendment protects freedom of the press. And yes, it says that if you publish or if you do this and you're engaged in the act, you are protected. Like, yes, anybody can be a journalist. You elitist person. Anybody can be. Anybody can be.
Journalism is an act. It's a practice. It's not an
all
identity.
of these people, every single person who is watching this show today can be a journalist.
Yep.
If they go out and tell people what they just saw in this show, they are technically doing journalism and would be protected in forwarding on that information to everyone in their friends and their circles. And so, with that said, thank you all for watching, and stay warm. And I don't know, anything else you want to say before we sign off?
Subscribe to Kevin's newsletter right here. Or you can also go to shadowproof.com/donate and check out our other options. Otherwise, we will catch you not this coming Thursday, but the Thursday right after that. And I hope you all enjoy your vacation from us. Take care, Kevin. I'll talk to you soon.